Every empire thinks its money is immortal. Every single one is wrong. Not because of war, not because of invasion, but because of a pattern so precise it repeats like clockwork. And if that pattern is right, then the most powerful currency on earth is already past the point of no return. For over 600 years, the world has experimented with global money, different flags, different languages, different empires, but the ending, always the same. Portugal believed its currency would last forever. So did the Dutch, so did the British. Each one dominated global trade. Each one controlled the world's money. Each one collapsed after following the exact same sequence. And here's the uncomfortable part. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency in 1944. That was 81 years ago. Every reserve currency in history lasted between 80 and 110 years. Right now, the dollar is sitting in stage 5 of that same cycle. This isn't ideology. It isn't politics. It isn't prophecy. It's arithmetic. A 7-stage economic pattern that has already played out 4 times, and it never breaks. The only real question is this: are we early enough to understand it, or late enough to pay the price? Before we break down the 7 stages, there's something you must understand. A reserve currency isn't just a strong currency. It's the currency the world needs. Oil is priced in it. Global trade settles in it. Central banks hoard it. Debt is written in it. When you control the reserve currency, you control the bloodstream of the global economy. You can print money and exchange it for real goods produced by other nations. You can run permanent trade deficits because the world needs your currency more than you need their products. You can borrow cheaper than anyone else because global demand for your debt is structural, not optional. Economists call this exorbitant privilege. Empires call it power. But history calls it temporary. Because the same privilege that lifts a currency to the top is what eventually pulls it down. Every reserve currency begins the same way. Not with money, with force. Stage 1. Military dominance over trade routes. Reserve currencies are never chosen politely. They are imposed by control. Not control of land, control of trade pathways. Whoever controls the routes controls the currency. In the 1400s, Portugal cracked ocean navigation. While other nations hugged coastlines, Portuguese ships crossed open seas. They reached Asia. They bypassed old land routes. And then they militarized commerce. Armed ports, naval choke points, cannons deciding who could trade and who couldn't. If you wanted spices, silk, or access to Asia, you needed Portuguese permission and Portuguese money. Not because it was stable, not because it was backed by gold, because it was backed by guns. The Dutch repeated the same strategy in the 1600s. The Dutch East India Company wasn't a company, it was a private empire. Warships, armies, global reach, trade flowed through Amsterdam. So did money. Britain perfected it. At its peak, the Royal Navy was larger than the next 5 navies combined. Every global choke point, Suez, Gibraltar, Singapore, British-controlled. Trade followed the Navy. Currency followed trade. And then came the United States. After World War II, the U.S. didn't just win militarily. It inherited global infrastructure, bases near every major trade route, naval dominance in every ocean, control without direct occupation. Trade could not function without American approval. That's stage 1, and the dollar. Check completed. But military control alone doesn't make you rich. That comes next, stage 2. Massive trade surpluses. Once you control trade routes, wealth flows toward you, not stolen, extracted through advantage. Portugal imported Asian goods cheaply and sold them in Europe at massive markups. Lisbon became rich beyond imagination. The Dutch turned arbitrage into an art form. Buy low in one continent, sell high in another. Capture the spread. Amsterdam became the warehouse of the world. Britain exported manufactured goods everywhere and imported raw materials at prices it dictated. London became the financial center of the planet. The United States took this to an entirely new level. From 1945 to 1970, America produced everything the world needed. Factories intact, competitors rebuilding cars, steel, machinery, consumer goods. Dollars flooded into foreign central banks. Gold flooded into Fort Knox. By the 1950s, the U.S. held more gold than the rest of the world combined. This was the golden age, and it never lasts, because, eventually, the world wants your money more than your products. This is the peak. The moment the world officially agrees, your currency is the standard. For Britain, it was 1815. For the U.S., it was Bretton Woods, 1944. The dollar became global money. Other currencies pegged to it, gold pegged to it. But hidden inside this victory was the seed of collapse. Because once the world needs your currency for reserves, you must supply it. And the only way to supply global demand is to run deficits. This is the Tryphon dilemma. To feed the world dollars, America had to send dollars abroad, which means importing more than exporting, which means the surplus flips. And when it flips, stage 4 begins, because stage 4 is where empires stop producing and start consuming their past. And once that line is crossed, no reserve currency in history has ever recovered. And that's where everything breaks. Every reserve currency collapses the same way, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, while everyone still believes everything is fine. And this is the stage where the damage becomes permanent. Stage 4, living beyond your means. This is the point of no return. The moment a reserve currency nation stops producing wealth and starts consuming it. Portugal crossed this line in the mid-1500s. Instead of exporting goods, they imported everything: food, textiles, manufactured products. How did they pay for it? Gold. Gold mined elsewhere. Gold accumulated earlier. They weren't building, they were spending. The royal court grew extravagant. Military costs exploded. Palaces, churches, prestige projects. And nobody panicked. Why would they? The money kept coming, until one day, it didn't. The Dutch followed the same script. After a century of dominance, they became comfortable. Why build factories when you can live off investments? Why innovate when capital earns money on its own? Dutch wealth shifted from production to finance. Loans replaced factories. Interest replaced invention. It felt smart. It was fatal. Britain learned this lesson the hard way. By 1900, Britain was running trade deficits. Food imported, raw materials imported, even manufactured goods imported. They paid for it with overseas investments. Wealth created long ago. Factories aged, competitors modernized. Britain was still rich, but no longer productive. The empire was eating its past. And then there's the United States. In 1971, something historic happened. America's trade surplus didn't just shrink, it disappeared forever. From that moment on, the U.S. imported more than it exported every single year. By the 2000s, the U.S. was running the largest trade deficits in human history, hundreds of billions annually. Consumer goods, electronics, cars, clothing, paid for with one thing: newly created dollars. This only works because the dollar is the reserve currency. Other nations accept dollars because they need them. But economically, this is living beyond your means. And every reserve currency that does this moves to the same next stage. Because when deficits explode, printing becomes irresistible. This is the desperate stage. The one every empire swears is temporary. Portugal did it first. They reduced silver content in coins, issued more currency than metal. Prices rose, trust fell, merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. The real began to rot. The Dutch followed. Borrowing funded wars. Borrowing became expensive, so they printed. The guilder weakened. Confidence slipped. Trade quietly moved elsewhere. Britain's debasement came through war. World War I forced money printing. Gold abandoned. World War II finished the job. By 1945, the pound was floating and sinking. Devaluations followed. Each one destroyed confidence. By the 1970s, The pound was no longer global money, it was regional. Now look at the United States. In 2008, the financial system cracked. The response: money creation on a scale never seen before. Trillions created digitally. Then came COVID, even more printing. Between 2008 and 2022, over $10 trillion were created. This isn't debasement with shaved coins. It's debasement with keystrokes. And the result is the same. Inflation, eroded purchasing power, lost trust. Since 2020 alone, the dollar has lost roughly 25% of its buying power. And because the dollar is global, this inflation was exported worldwide. Every central bank holding dollars felt it. Every country relying on dollar trade felt it. This is stage 5. And historically, stage 5 never ends peacefully. Many hooks shift because once trust cracks, the search begins. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. This is where everything accelerates. Not overnight, but relentlessly. Portugal saw this first. Merchants stopped accepting reals. They demanded Spanish silver instead. Trade contracts shifted currencies. By the time Spain annexed Portugal, the market had already decided. The Dutch experienced a slower version. Through the 1700s, reserves shifted away. London replaced Amsterdam. The guilders survived locally, but lost globally. Britain's loss was faster. After World War II, confidence collapsed. In 1949, the pound lost 30% overnight. Foreign holders were burned. They never trusted it again. Within 15 years, the dollar had replaced the pound completely. Now watch the modern signs. China and Russia reducing dollar reserves. Central banks buying gold at record levels. BRICS discussing alternatives. Saudi Arabia accepting non-dollar oil payments. Dollar share of global reserves falling from 72% to under 60%. These aren't political gestures, they're defensive moves. No one wants to be last holding depreciating currency. This is early stage 6, and history says, once stage 6 starts, stage 7 follows. Because stage 7 isn't announced. It happens when the world quietly moves on and one day realizes the old money no longer matters. In the final part, we'll answer the question that scares everyone. What replaces the dollar and what happens to your wealth when it does? Reserve currencies don't collapse with explosions. They collapse with silence. One day, the world simply stops asking for them. And by the time headlines catch up, the transfer of wealth is already complete. This is the endgame, not a vote, not a treaty, a market decision. Portugal's real didn't fail. It was abandoned. Merchants chose Spanish silver instead. Why? Because Spain controlled massive silver production in the Americas. Reliable supply, standardized coins, trade followed reliability. Within 2 decades, the real vanished from global commerce. The Dutch guilder met the same fate. Britain's industrial power exploded. Factories, ships, railroads. London's markets grew deeper than Amsterdam's. Trade migrated. By 1815, the pound wasn't just dominant. It was unavoidable. The guilder survived regionally, but its global role was over. The British pound collapsed even faster. After World War II, Britain was broke. The US held most of the world's gold. The world needed dollars. The transition happened in under 20 years. By the time people noticed, it was irreversible. This is how reserve currencies die. So what replaces the dollar? Here's the truth nobody likes. There is no clean replacement. China has production power, but not free capital markets. The yuan isn't fully convertible. Capital controls break trust. Europe has the euro, but no unified fiscal authority. Aging populations, energy dependence. Gold is trusted, but can't scale. Crypto threatens the system, but governments won't surrender control. So history suggests something worse, a messy transition. A world with multiple currencies, regional trade blocs, gold for settlement, volatility everywhere. This isn't progress, it's fragmentation. Why this matters to you, this isn't academic. When reserve currencies collapse, ordinary people pay the price. Savings lose value. Pensions shrink. Wages lag behind prices. Portugal's merchants were ruined. Dutch middle-class wealth evaporated. Britain's lost decades of purchasing power. And today, since 2020, the dollar has already lost about 25% of its value. That's silent confiscation. No headlines, no announcements, just math. What smart money does? It doesn't panic. It positions early. Diversification across real assets, productive businesses, commodities, hard assets that don't depend on one currency. It watches the signals, reserve data, trade settlements, gold accumulation. And when stage 7 arrives, it isn't surprised. The timeline: nobody wants to see reserve currencies last 80 to 110 years. Portugal, approximately 80 years. Dutch, approximately 80 years. British, approximately 105 years. The dollar became dominant in 1944. That makes it 81 years old, right on schedule, and showing every late-stage symptom. The final truth this time isn't different, only bigger. Because when the dollar falls, it won't be regional, it will be global. Debt markets, trade systems, savings worldwide, all affected, and the people who understood the pattern early won't be the ones left holding depreciating paper. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, and the rhythm is getting louder. If this changed how you see money, power, and the future, you're already ahead of most people.